Not long ago, we explored the concept of the M-shaped life. The approach of designing your life around multiple deep passions rather than pressuring yourself to commit to only one. But as I read through the comments, I began noticing a theme that stayed with me. Many of you said things like, "I wish I had come across this 20 years ago," or asked, "Is it too late for me if I'm already in my 50s or 60s? Since I'm not yet 50, it would feel presumptuous to position this as life advice." That isn't my intention. What your questions did, however, was motivate me to dig into the research, to explore what cognitive science reveals about how the brain changes with age, and what that means for our capacity to learn, adapt, and begin again. So what I'm sharing here is simply the research I found, along with a framework I've created to help you apply it in practical ways. These ideas are built specifically around how the 50-plus brain functions, and I genuinely hope they serve you well. The first step is to challenge an old and stubborn myth. Many of us view our minds through a narrative of gradual, unavoidable decline. We notice our thinking slow slightly, we struggle to recall a name, and we assume, that's it, my learning years are behind me. But the evidence tells a different story. This isn't a tale of deterioration. It's a story of ongoing restructuring, a transition into a different cognitive mode that brings its own distinct strengths. The most significant shift involves two forms of intelligence. The first is fluid intelligence, essentially your brain's raw processing speed. It's your ability to quickly solve unfamiliar problems or juggle new information in real time. And yes, research consistently shows that this kind of speed does decrease with age. But there's another type, crystallized intelligence. This is your accumulated knowledge, your lived experience, your grasp of nuance and complexity. In other words, it's wisdom. And unlike fluid intelligence, this does not fade. In fact, it continues to expand and become more richly connected well into your 60s, 70s, and beyond. A classic study of typists illustrates this beautifully. Older typists performed just as quickly as younger ones, even though their raw finger-tapping speed was slower. How do they manage that? They relied on their deep reservoir of experience. They looked further ahead in the text, predicting upcoming words and phrases. Their knowledge compensated for reduced speed. The problem many of us run into is that we attempt to learn new skills the way a 20-year-old might, leaning almost entirely on processing speed. We try to force ourselves to memorize a new language or master a new skill through sheer repetition, then grow discouraged when it doesn't stick. That's like trying to drive down the highway stuck in first gear. You're exerting far more effort than necessary. And this isn't just a metaphor. It's grounded in biology. Brain scans show that when younger individuals perform a task, activity tends to concentrate in a specific, localized region. In older adults, however, the same task activates a broader network. Instead of relying on a single area, the brain brings in additional regions for support. This process is known as compensatory scaffolding. Your brain is reorganizing itself in real time, constructing supportive structures by engaging more of its networks to solve a problem. Because these extra systems are being recruited, learning can feel more demanding. It literally consumes more metabolic energy. But that extra effort isn't a sign of decline. It's a sign of preservation. By challenging and engaging these scaffolds, you help maintain them. Even though overall brain volume may decrease slightly with age, the capacity to form new functional connections, neuroplasticity, remains steady. With the right approach, you can absolutely sustain high levels of competence well in a later life. So how do we apply this? The concept of serial mastery we discussed earlier still holds true. This means committing to one major skill at a time for a defined season, typically 6 to 18 months, rather than attempting to learn everything simultaneously. However, we need to adapt this approach to align with your brain's current operating style. There are two key adjustments. First, because your brain is expending more energy to construct these scaffolds, you need strategic cognitive resource management. That starts with honoring your daily rhythms. You've probably noticed your internal clock shifting over the years, and that shift is biologically real. Most people over 50 naturally become more alert in the mornings. Your sharpest window of focus often occurs earlier in the day. Take advantage of that. Schedule your most demanding learning, the complex, mentally taxing material, before noon. Next, consider the spacing effect. Instead of pushing through long, exhausting study marathons, divide your learning into shorter, concentrated sessions. Aim for 3 focused 40-minute blocks instead of one continuous 2-hour stretch. This kind of microdosing helps prevent the rapid depletion of neurotransmitters that leads to mental fog. Finally, think about your mental workspace. Rather than picturing working memory as a powerful computer processor, imagine it as a compact workbench. With age, that bench becomes slightly smaller. You can't spread as many tools across it at once without creating clutter and chaos. The solution is straightforward. Write things down. Treat your notebook as an extension of your workspace, a tidy, external surface that allows you to focus on one tool at a time without overwhelm. The second, and most essential, adjustment involves deliberately building scaffolds by linking new information to existing knowledge. Whenever you encounter something new, resist the urge to memorize it in isolation. Instead, anchor it to concepts you already understand. This approach is known as relational learning. Research indicates that although raw processing speed declines, our capacity to detect structural similarities across different domains remains strong. So if you're learning to code, don't just stare at abstract syntax. Compare the structure of a function to the role of verbs in a language you already know. If you're studying a new business model related to a historical event you're familiar with, by consciously connecting the unfamiliar to the familiar, you reduce reliance on raw speed and instead tap into the vast, stable network of knowledge you've built over decades. However, this remarkable strength, this expansive internal library, carries a hidden challenge. For the 50-plus brain, the greatest obstacle in learning isn't always acquiring new information. Often, it's letting go of outdated patterns. For years, even decades, you've been traveling the same mental pathways. Your routines and career abilities are like well-worn trails etched deep into the ground. When you attempt to adopt a new method, especially one that resembles something you already know, your brain naturally wants to slip back into the familiar route. This phenomenon is known as proactive interference, and it can feel incredibly discouraging. The issue isn't that you're incapable of learning. It's that your previous knowledge is actively obstructing the new. So the real question becomes, can we train our minds to be more adaptable, to maneuver around those old default pathways more easily? Maybe what we truly need is to relearn how to be complete beginners, the way we were as children. This is precisely what Dr. Rachel Wu explored in her research on cognitive agility. Her findings suggest that we lose mental flexibility because we move away from that childlike openness to the world. Children absorb multiple, entirely different skills at once: a language, physical coordination, social norms, without decades of ingrained habits interfering. In her studies, older adults who simultaneously learned 3 unrelated skills, Spanish, photography, and painting, for 15 hours a week over 3 months experienced remarkable improvements. Their processing speed and working memory increased to levels similar to individuals decades younger. At this point, you might wonder, doesn't this conflict with the idea of serial mastery, focusing deeply on one pursuit at a time? Not at all. In fact, the two approaches complement each other perfectly. Think of it as the pillar and the playground model. First, you select a single pillar. This becomes your primary serial mastery focus, receiving about 70% of your effort. It's the serious capability you're cultivating, where you rely on your crystallized intelligence and analogical encoding to dive deep. Then you create a playground. Here, you choose 2 additional skills, not with the aim of mastering them, but to support brain vitality. The crucial detail, which addresses the unlearning challenge, is that these skills must be dissimilar. They should be entirely different from your pillar and from one another. If your pillar is analytical, such as coding or financial planning, your playground activities should be physical or sensory, like watercolor painting or learning a new dance. If your pillar is creative, like writing a novel, your playground might involve something more structured, such as mechanics or tennis. I know some of you may be thinking, I don't have the money or time for expensive classes. But the playground isn't about luxury, it's about novelty. It could be as simple as joining a community choir, fixing an old clock, or learning how to play a video game. In fact, one well-known study used a video game called NeuroRacer to test multitasking abilities in older adults. Participants were required to steer a car along a twisting road while simultaneously responding to certain signs. The training lasted only 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 1 month. The results were striking. Not only did participants improve at the game, but their working memory and their capacity to filter distractions improved significantly. Their cognitive efficiency increased so much that their brain activity patterns began to resemble those of a 20-year-old. Even more impressively, those benefits were still evident 6 months after the training ended. So if a game or hobby pushes you to manage new, slightly unpredictable information, it qualifies. It can also be a wonderful way to connect with younger generations in their own space. And here's how we prevent the playground from draining energy needed for your main pillar. Your sole responsibility there is to remain a beginner. You're not building another mountain of expertise. You're simply exploring. I'll be organizing these topics gradually, one at a time. Until then, take care. I'll see you in the next video.